Ladies and gentlemen, Holly and I are back today. We have another great installment in our continuing series on the secrets of the Royal Society, and this is part 3 tonight. We're going to be focusing on the history of the dialectic of capitalism and communism, as well as we're going to be getting into social engineering and even psychedelic studies and research will show up later on in this episode. First off, I want to start off by thanking some people. Thank you to Polygonal Construction for just making a $5 donation right off. Much appreciated, good sir. Also want to thank, Eclectic Artisan for their donation from England this week. And Lewis, thank you also for your donation. And Marilyn, thank you for yours. Also, Mel. And there was a couple of others. Jonathan, thank you for yours. Martin, Derek, all of you, thank you for your support. Also, thank you to Matthew and a couple of other people. And thanks to those of you who also have contributed over the last week or two on the Patreon page. It's hugely appreciated. We've been doing a lot of research. Holly was here up until last Wednesday. She went home on Wednesday, so she's back in Maine, and I'll be going back out there in a couple of weeks. But we have a load of material to cover tonight. Hopefully I have about 10 pages of notes here. Hopefully we can cover it all tonight and not need to make an extra episode. There's going to be at least one episode after this one going into some of the more contemporary people in the Royal Society, like Bob Dylan or Richard Dawkins, Rupert Sheldrake, Elon Musk, etc. All of these people. But the pattern is the same that we've seen throughout history. So anyway, Holly, do you want to start off? Do you want to say a little bit about yourself? Also, thanks to everyone who supported Holly's show this last week and everything.
Yes, so I'm sure your audience probably knows who I am at this point, but I'm Holly Urban, and I have a YouTube channel called Zoon Politikon. And that's a term from Aristotle, which means man is a political animal. And thank you, Jeffrey, for the super chat. And if you feel like supporting my work or joining my work, I will try to put a link to my channel in the chat at some point. I am trying to get up to 10,000 subscribers, and I've been making YouTube videos for about 2 years now, and doing lots of research over the past 6 months or so with Jan, right? And I thought that having a third episode of the Royal Society would wrap things up. But as we started to put this show together, I was like, all right, we're going to need like a fourth.
Maybe a fifth.
Yeah. Or maybe a whole book, I don't know, or a documentary or something. Because it's so fascinating, and it gets to the point now where when Jan and I will discuss a philosopher or an economist, and I just want to say, first of all, I'm not an economist. Like, my bachelor's is in political science. So I know whenever I talk about Marx or Adam Smith, there is always someone in the audience who is like, you're wrong about this and that. And I freely admit I'm not an expert on this topic at all. I'm just a woman with a computer and who likes to read and do research. So as we started to research the Royal Society, we're at the point now where Jan and I, whenever we will read about someone, will be like, are they a member of the Royal Society? And it seems like 50% of the time or more, we look it up and they are. So I implore the audience, as soon as you start researching someone, a philosopher, a great mind, a scientist, if you will, look up and see if they're a member of the Royal Society.
We need air quotes on great researcher, scientist, or whatever. And, thank you so much, Jeffrey, and Polygonal again for the support in the show. But so, yeah, it seems that everywhere we turn, these people are members of the Royal Society. The Royal Society was founded in, what, 1630s, 1630. I forget what exact year in the 1630s they're about, but they've been around for a long time. And it seems if there is a hot pile of scientism somewhere, the Royal Society is behind it. And the more we look into the Royal Society, the more we begin to see their agendas and the type of thing that we're selling. So, ladies and gentlemen, you may be shocked to hear tonight, and we're going to get into this much deeper, but communism was largely promoted by the Royal Society. And so it's going to get very deep as we go into a lot of this stuff. And, again, Holly and I, neither of us are economists or, whatnot. I'm a network engineer and an ethnobotanist, etc. Former ethnobotanist. I've been exposing the CIA for years and all of their corruption. And then Holly and I, for those of you who don't know, started researching the Salem witch trials, which we're still working on a book on that. And then all of the people many of the people that we were investigating in the Salem witch trials were members of the Royal Society. And then we started realizing that there was a big dialectic going on there with members of the Royal Society. So it's no different. Holly is going to start off tonight, and she's going to be starting off with this guy, Adam Smith, who is a famous economist, and this is the Great Books of the Western World, book 39. But so I highly recommend people that want to know also more about all of these people and all of the corruption and things that they promoted. Get a set of the Great Books of the Western World, because you can read about all of the historical fraud. Some legitimate researchers in there too, but most of them are pretty bunk. And you can go in there and read through all of these people. And, it takes up about 6 feet of shelf space if you have it, just to warn you. But so, Holly, I'm going to pass it over to you to dive into Adam Smith.
Okay, so if you get a chance while I start, could you put my my channel in the chat?
Sure.
Link to my channel. Okay. So I wanted to talk about Adam Smith. So at first, Jan and I had discovered that Karl Marx was a member of the Royal Society, and we know, if you've researched economic theory or 20th century history, there's this dialectic between Marx and Adam Smith. So we're supposed to believe we have two options. It's either communism or capitalism, and that's it. And it reminds me a lot of what we see in American politics, where it's red or blue, Republicans versus Democrats. They give us this dichotomy. You get two options. Those are your options. And we could go into a whole discussion of why there's only two options always. But Adam Smith, I felt like we needed to at least touch upon him, because you can't really have a discussion about Marx and Engels without discussing Adam Smith, because in many ways, Marx and Engels, their writings, especially Communist Manifesto, is in complete opposition to Adam Smith. And guess what? Adam Smith was also a member of the Royal Society. So we start to see that it's, Royal Society created this dialectic. And of course, as you start to research Marx as well, Marx was a Hegelian. He was a Hegelian researcher. And so
let's not skip ahead. Let's just focus on Adam Smith.
Yeah. Jan has to try to rein me in, because I jump ahead in the notes, and this is a big problem of mine. I have to try to stay with the notes. So bear with me as I try to follow our notes this evening. So Adam Smith became a member of the Royal Society in 1773. So just as the American Revolution was starting up, Adam Smith was English. He was not a member of the nobility, but well-to-do family in England, born in 1723. And he was known as an economist, philosopher, author. He later dabbled into moral philosophy, a pioneer of political economy, and they made him basically the forefront of the Scottish Enlightenment with, of course, the help of the Royal Society promoting his work. So he graduated from Glasgow University and was teaching there. He was a professor for many years before he was made a member of the Royal Society. And then in 1776, which is the year of the American independence, as people know if you're an American listening tonight, he published an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. So he also published the theory of moral sentiments a few years before that. And basically the wealth of nations is still read in economics classes to this day. It's considered his magnum opus and is basically called the first modern work on economics. He coined the term capitalism. He also talked about something called mercantilism, or the mercantile system, which I would also like to speak about. So he defined capitalism and mercantilism, and really promoted a lot of works towards revolution. So his works were later used to promote the French Revolution, and he defined mercantilism as high tariffs, which was central to the American Revolution. And he opposed something called bullionism, which is the collection of gold and silver by a nation. He believed it was hoarding. He thought it was bad for a nation to accumulate gold and silver, which during his time, Spain and France were engaging in this at a massive scale, and it was sort of undermining English power in Europe. And he called it protectionism. He didn't like the idea of protectionism. He basically coined the theory of free trade. Also, people know about the invisible hand if you study economics, the invisible hand. So he argued for free market competition. He believed that free and open markets would create peace and prosperity amongst nations. And he defined the invisible hand as a self-regulated market that would promote self-interest, prosperity for all nations instead of protectionism, tariffs, and bullionism. So all of this actually undermines the crown if you start to think of it that way. And royal, was it right to own, or the royal power to collect tariffs, to tax its people, bullionism, protectionism. And he started to promote something called the division of labor. So this was also very central to his theories, that instead of he used this example in The Wealth of Nations, that instead of having pin makers in England, so think of like a little metal pin with a little head to the pin and selling it to other nations, he supposed and believed that if you had the division of labor, so instead of having a person make the entire pin from start to finish, he wanted someone to just make the metal and to just make the pin itself, so just straighten the metal itself. And then one person focuses on just making the pin, and then another person focuses on just making the box for the pin. And so he created this idea of the division of labor, so the specialization. He believed that way people would have better employment, was basically his theory. And he was also in opposition to heavy taxes and restrictions that frustrated the American colonists. and eventually led to the American Revolution. So defenders of mercantilism argue that economic system creates stronger economies by bringing colonies and the founding countries together. So he kind of wanted to split up the colonies from their nation state, if you will. And maybe I could pass it over to you for a minute. I could also talk about the characteristics of mercantilism if you want more.
Sure. Why don't you, you can hit that. And, we talk about it a little bit in the Salem research because of the, all of the merchant ships and everything and the tariff wars and whatnot going on there. But sure, why don't you fill that in? And by the way, before you do, thank you, Brian, for just sending a $100 donation. I really appreciate that.
That's excellent. So the idea of mercantilism, as Smith called it, it was also called Colbertism, which was by Jean-Baptiste Colbert, which was a French political thinker of the early 1600s. He was a bullionist. He was very proud of his nation of France. So he believed that in order to build a nation, you needed strong agriculture, strong trade, a strong army and navy, and a large population. So he wanted people to have lots of children in France, really focusing on the French and building the French Empire. And Spain started to emulate this idea. He also was very pro bullionism, so collecting gold and silver. And as it went into later mercantilism in the later 1600s, they wanted active foreign trade, active export system, and high tariffs. And this was not appreciated, let's just say, by the English. And so Adam Smith started to write against mercantilism and Colbertism, and said that all of this would actually create more wars. And so he created this idea of capitalism to go against this idea of the nation and Colbertism. So, and this idea started to spread and became powerful during the American Revolution, because the colonists who were part of England, of course, at the time, wanted to separate, and they didn't want the high tariffs that was promoted by mercantilism.
And thanks, everyone, for watching. Make sure you subscribe and hit the like button for us. We really appreciate it. And so, the reason why we started off with Adam Smith is because when we were doing the outline for this episode, we realized we had to go back. And I know that we ended with Darwin and some of the people in the late 1800s. So why are we starting off with 1773? So we're going to be jumping forward now, almost a century. We're going to jump forward here about 75, 80 years to Auguste Comte. And so he was actually not a member of the Royal Society as far as we can tell, but he did influence a number of Royal Society members. And Comte was a utopian socialist, and he influenced social Darwinism or social evolution, and was into positive thinking. And of course, if you go way back about 8 or 9 years into the Gnostic media archives of the early shows, I did a show with Barbara Ehrenreich on positivism and how it was destroying America. And interestingly, she was at one point a radical feminist. But anyway, she lays out a pretty good argument against positivism there and all of the positive thinking that we see. Her book, How Positive Thinking is Undermining or Destroying America. But so that was, really important stuff. But we can see that this positive thinking theory comes all the way from Comte and some of the other people in his time. And Comte also heavily influenced Karl Marx and John Stuart Mill. And interestingly, John Stuart Mill was a member of the Royal Society. And he is who influenced none other than Mao Zedong, who then would go on to create communism for China and murder 10 or 15 million Chinese people. And so that was all on the doing of Comte and Stuart Mill and members of the Royal Society. We can thank them like usual. And so Comte's stages were, and he basically said that that there were 3 stages, but he says the 3 stages were the theological stage, the metaphysical stage, and the positive stage. So we see all of this positivism out there today being promoted by the liberal CIA cult leaders and whatnot out there that I've already spent years exposing. For those of you who are new to the show and whatnot, I highly recommend going into the archives and looking at that material. So let's see. The theological stage was seen from the perspective of 19th century France as preceding the Age of Enlightenment, in which man's place in society and society's restrictions upon man were referenced to God. Now, and thank you, Uncommon, for continuously supporting the show. We really appreciate it. Check out his channel. He's got some great funny stuff. He bashes on Morrissey like hilariously. It's really good. But, which everyone should do. If you're not a Morrissey basher, I highly recommend you become one. You can take some tips from him. But
you should have him on your show sometime.
Morrissey or Uncommon? So Morrissey can talk about how he's friends with cows and stuff, So let's see. Yeah, I know she's talking about Uncommon. So what they lie about, though, is that the Christian belief in God was truth itself and living and acting in truth all of the time. So these people rejected truth as God, or they rejected logos. They rejected, essentially someone who rejects logos or truth is basically a Satanist. So that sums up easily. And then we can begin to see the constant historical agenda of the Royal Society. Man blindly believed in whatever he was taught by his ancestors. So again, he just blindly believed foolishly. It didn't matter if it was actually about truth and honor, living in truth and honor. Like if you look at people in the 17 and 1800s, they had far more truth and honor than people today. And that's why people had duels and stuff like that. If you insulted someone's honor and integrity, you could be killed for it. And he believed in a supernatural power. Fetishism played a significant role during this time. So it was just fetishes. People were just ignorant and stupid. They didn't know any better. And what we actually find is that, the further back into history we go, the far more intellectual and educated people were. And people would probably reach their intellectual height in the 17 or 1800s, is my guess. Comte considered anthropology, or true science of man, to be the last gradation of the grand hierarchy of abstract science. So, we see, and of course we've exposed for years now how anthropology has been used by the CIA and MI6, etc., to overthrow various cultures. So what they'll do is they'll send anthropologists into a region to study that group and to figure out how they can subvert them, whether it be indigenous cultures or whether it be your local town or wherever you are today. So they will send people in to study and to write about you, and then that research will be used to overthrow your culture or your group. And so Brazil's flag, if you can believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, and I should probably pull that up here, I forgot, is actually made in honor of Comte. And I'm just pulling it up here. And we can see Ordem e Progresso, which is order and progress in the Brazilian flag, is inspired by Auguste Comte's motto, positivism. And oh goodness, I should probably have Holly read that. L'amour pour principe et l'ordre pour base le progrès pour but, or love as a principle and order as the basis, progress as the goal. So, so what we have is these hardcore communists who, from the Royal Society, who then actually influence the foundation of and let me move that window back. Sorry, folks. Of other countries, even today. So Comte, he was also he's considered today, and I have a link up here for that someplace if I can find that here. Here it is. So, technological conspiracies, Comte technology, and the spiritual despotism. So, I've done a lot of research exposing transhumanism and all of this stuff, and Holly and I are planning to do another show on it soon because we're seeing it creep up everywhere and being promoted as an agenda now. So, in regard to Comte and the technology conspiracy, while there have been numerous critiques of the ideology of technology, it is useful to situate technology within both a liberal and a conspiratorial framework. The early work of Auguste Comte offers an ideal vehicle for this kind of analysis. Liberalisms, and of course, I posted last week on Facebook how all of the key people behind the creation of the psychedelic movement were the same people behind the transhumanism and tech movement. So that's actually really the same thing. And so, for instance, Stuart Brand, the Whole Earth Catalog, taken from the Book of Daniel. He was a member of the Merry Pranksters, CIA, U.S. Army, Electronic Freedom Foundation, and behind the creation of computers. Dr. Timothy Leary, of course, the psychedelic guru, admitted CIA agent, promoted virtual reality, promotion of computers, psychedelics, digital BN, along with the human BN and all the rest, if transhumanism at all. Dr. James Fadiman, SRI, computers, helped invent the mouse, like the one in my hand here, and worked on the SRI CIA project headed by Willis Harriman and Joseph Campbell, Changing Images of Man. Also promoted psychedelics. He was the last person to do legal LSD studies in the U.S. for MKUltra. Also, his wife was a member of the Merry Pranksters and lover to Ken Kesey. And, of course, he is CIA. He and I have gotten in some major battles when he tried to slander me on Facebook for beginning to expose this stuff. And, of course, Sir Julian Huxley. He coined the word transhumanism. He was, of course, a heavy eugenicist, and we'll be talking about him more in a bit. And his brother Aldous Huxley headed the MKUltra program. Terence McKenna was behind the Time Wave Zero thing, which was based on Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's Omega Point theory, which I exposed some years back, about 5 or 6 years ago. And he promoted cybernetics. And, of course, this is a book on cybernetics and the Macy conferences. And, of course, the Macy conferences were behind the MKUltra program. For any of those who are familiar with MKUltra funding, one of the funds that the money was funneled through was the Macy Foundation. And they're still around today. They're still alive and kicking, and I'm sure they're still just as much CIA as they always were. John Perry Barlow was another one, and we've exposed him on the UnSpun show many times in the past. CIA founder of the Electronic Freedom Foundation. He was one of the key people behind the creation of Burning Man to promote Satanism and suggestogen drug use or psychedelic drug use so that they could mind control all those people out in the desert. The digital BN, and he died of a heart attack, in my opinion, about the same day when he was exposed by QAnon. So, thank goodness. I shouldn't say that, actually. My apologies, my condolences to his family. The guy did a lot of evil stuff, though, that should not be excused. And Ramdas, or Dick Alpert, he was behind the digital BNs, psychedelics, CIA, the Human BN, the Castelia Foundation, Harvard Psilocybin Project, IFIF, etc., Wavy Gravy, or Hugh Nanton Romney, Digital BN. He was another Merry Prankster. U.S. Army. He was partially behind the Summer of Love, as we've already done shows on that. He was another behind Woodstock and running the pig farm and the pig pen at Woodstock. It's in the name, folks. You're the pigs, and they're the ones managing the farm. And they got all the kids rolling in the mud to the rock idols. Rock idols. Get it? You worship rock idols? So Ken Kesey, digital BN, electric Kool-Aid acid tests, head of the Merry Pranksters, CIA, etc. Gregory Bateson, the founder of the CIA, cybernetics, MK Ultra, SRI, Changing Images of Man, another one a part of the Macy Foundation conferences, and 5 of those were associated to the Merry Pranksters: Stuart Brand, Timothy Leary, James Fadiman, Ken Kesey, and Wavy Gravy. So, all of this stuff goes into what is accused of Comte here: liberalism's embrace of technology, developed by Comte to produce a theory of scientific and technical elites intent on reinventing society and the individual. That sounds like the Bitcoin motto right there. And so this technological conspiracy reads very much like elements of a Silicon Valley manifesto describing the cyber utopia of a near tomorrow. So I'm going to pass it back over to Holly. Holly?
Wow. Okay. So I guess if we are going by the notes,
we're going with Karl Marx now.
Marx is next. So we're going to jump back 150 years. I think, or so.
No, Comte was 10 years before Marx, so we're actually in chronological order. The only one that we had to jump back for was Adam Smith, and now we're actually getting back in line with our chronology from the earlier shows on this.
Okay. So, as we were talking about Adam Smith, his work was published in 1776. His seminal work about capitalism and as opposed to mercantilism. And by 1862, Karl Marx himself also became a member of the Royal Society. He was a foreign member. He was originally born in Germany, and he had been living in London along with his good friend Engels. So
wait, let me just show an image up here that Holly sent me to show of Engels and Marx, just so we can see the two of them. There they are. Two little lovebirds sitting in the tree.
His dear friend Friedrich Engels, and who basically bankrolled Karl Marx through most of his adult life and through much of his research across the many years that they worked together. Engels is just as important in the creation and the writing of the Communist Manifesto. And a lot of people think falsely that Marx invented the idea of communism. It was already kind of stirring up in Europe, in Germany, and based off of the idea of the communes, which were really promoted in France during the time. And also we've talked about in our previous episode, I think it was Puritans and the hippie movement, we talked about how Puritanism actually really promoted the idea of communism and communes with their offshoots of levelers and diggers, the idea of common land, public land, and people living together. The Puritan model in Massachusetts was very communistic. Everyone worked on a central plot of land. And so that's a topic for another video, of course. Thank you, Philip, for the super chat. So Karl Marx was funded by his good friend Friedrich Engels, whose family owned a massive factory. So they were actually living off of the factory. Karl Marx and Engels wrote in reaction to Adam Smith's laissez-faire free market capitalism. And Marx believed that the extension of the labor theory of value, which was promoted by philosophers Hobbes, John Locke, Adam Smith, etc., indicated that capitalists, owners of the means of production, which some people in the chat might already know a lot about this, would exploit workers by depriving them of value that workers themselves create. So according to Marx and Engels, surplus value is the difference between the value that the workers created and the wage that the worker receives from his employer. And so Marx was born in Trier, pretty middle class. And as I had mentioned before, he had studied Hegelian philosophy and law. And Marx later became stateless and lived in exile in London. And that's when he was conveniently made a member of the Società. And he combined his work with the German thinker Engels, and they were both researching and publishing for the British Museum. And in 1848, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, and then with the help and the support, the bankrolling of Engels, he wrote Das Kapital. And his political and philosophical thought, as we know, is still studied to this day. And Engels was living in Manchester, England, with him, basically kind of supporting Marx and his family up through the work of Das Kapital. And then after Marx died, Engels edited and created the second and third volumes. And for me, as I started to research the juxtaposition between Adam Smith and Karl Marx, I started to think about how the two were both Royal Society members, and they created this problem reaction solution. Funny, since Marx studied Hegel, that Adam Smith promotes bourgeois and capitalism over mercantilism or nationalism, the royal, what is it called? It was a right of kings. And then Marx and Engels, a century later, not even a century later, blame the bourgeoisie, and they promote state ownership of and state control of the means of production. Later on, of course, that turns into Leninism, Maoism, etc. So Marx's philosophy states that the bourgeoisie is the social class that came to own the means of production during modern industrialization. So Adam Smith really promotes industrialization and the Industrial Revolution. And then Marx and Engels turn around and blame industrialization upon the whose societal concerns are the value of property, preservation of capital. So the solution for them is the commune, which both comes back around to the Puritans again. And then they were promoting the communes in France. There was a French commune uprising in the 1840s, just as the Communist Manifesto comes out. And just a point I want to make, just a side note, is that both Adam Smith and Marx never actually criticize the banking system itself or usury. Both seem to undermine bullionism, the real oligarchs, if you will, whom they call the petty bourgeoisie. And of course, this is way back in the 1840s. Marx is complaining that machinery will reduce wages and undermine human capacity to earn. And here we are, 150 years later, we're still talking about how AI is going to replace all of us. So technology is both the problem, reaction, and the solution for the Royal Society, because I'm subscribed to the Royal Society YouTube channel, and today they came out with a video talking about how AI is going to solve all of our economic problems, while at the same time they acknowledge, just as Marx did, that machinery is going to undermine and destroy humanity. So I don't know if you want to jump in for a minute, or if you want me to keep going on about terms, or.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks, Brian, for your $5 donation there. He said, Do you think the model of cosmology is a mind-op? I do. I agree with you. I don't know what the answer is exactly because they've covered it up so well. But there's a lot of new stuff floating around out there that might be the answer to it. Some of you would probably know more than me since, I don't have the ability to get somewhere to do the research on it myself. So, and right now we're focused on Salem and the Royal Society, and it's a deep subject to try and get in how they've faked cosmology.
So, yeah, I noticed people were really talking. Someone was asking about flat Earth and stuff like that, if that's a psyop and whatnot. And I want to just show everyone real quick. This is what I think about it. I've got a collection of the Illuminati trading card game, and so I've got the card for the flat Earth. So you guys can do your own research on that, of course. And Samuel Robotham, and I think there's actually some connections between flat Earth societies and the Royal Society. That's probably a topic for another video. So best of luck to everyone that likes to talk about flat Earth. So getting back to Marx and Marxism. So they talk about the proletariat, and in Marxism, the dictatorship of the proletariat is actually a good thing. So it's a state in which the proletariat or the working class has control of political power. And they believe that this intermediary, it's between capitalism and communism. So it's the stepping stone. So if you hear about democratic socialists and stuff like that, it's a slow march to communism, basically. People who talk about socialism. And so that's when the people are in a process of changing the ownership of the means of production from private to collective ownership. And the Communist Manifesto is very globalist. So if you read it, or it's a short book, or if you listen to it, you can listen to it in an audiobook in like an hour and a half. So the communists are a global...
Fall asleep to it anyway.
Yeah, they're a global organization, and they're known as proletariats. They want an abolition of property relations, and it really promoted the French Revolution, which abolished feudal property to bourgeois property, and then communism as the abolition of bourgeois property. So it's a stepping stone. Eventually, they kind of flip-flopped in the Communist Manifesto if they really wanted to abolish personal property. But they say that capital is a collective product. It's a social power, yet communism is too. So basically their point is that they want concentration of resources to go towards the state. So that's my wrap up of just a quick overview of communism and Marx and Engels.
All right, so now we're going to jump forward a little bit to Sir James George Frazer. He didn't actually become a member of the Royal Society until 1920, but he wrote a number of famous books, and this is I've shown some of the unabridged version in a show recently, but he's famous for his book, The Golden Boat, or books. There's originally 12 or 13 in the full series. Most people are only familiar with this version, and he was influenced by Auguste Comte, and he was into social communism or social evolution. And so he was also knighted in 1914, so he was a sir. And why was he knighted? Why were these people knighted? What were they doing? And we've talked in the past about very possibly history was inverted, and they created a whole bogus history of paganism and shamanism and all of that stuff. And to me, he is the most likely candidate to look into, and I still haven't finished reading the full series of books that he printed. In fact, I still haven't even finished trying to acquire them all because it's a big set, and very expensive. So if anybody wants to help out with that, we appreciate it. People, please keep it on topic. Lee, others, please keep it on topic. We are not discussing flat Earth. This is not about flat Earth. So let's please, for the fourth time, keep it on topic. I appreciate that. And we like feedback from the show so that we can read people's comments that are actually on topic. And none of you are on topic. So let's
tisk.
So let's keep it on topic. Thanks for the interruption there. And so he was also a founder of social anthropology. And so, again, we see the anthropologists coming in to undermine a lot of, various cultures. And so his book, The Golden Bow, among the most influential elements of the third edition of The Golden Bow, and that's the full series, not this abridged edition I just held up, was of cultural evolution. So again, it's the evolution of society. You know, people didn't believe in logos and truth in the past. You know, they believed in magic and you know, fairy tales and all of this stuff. So they've literally created and seeded this stuff, in my opinion, back into history. But Frazer assigns religion and magic in the theory. Frazer's theory of cultural evolution was not absolute and could reverse, but sought to broadly describe 3 or possibly 4 spheres through which cultures were thought to pass over time. Frazer believed that over time, a culture will pass through 3 stages, moving from magic to religion to science or scientism or seanceism. And thanks to Caleb for that, for pointing that out. And so what we have is this, you know, and they admit it's a religion, but it's scientism, and all of it's promoted by these people out of the Royal Society. And a lot of the science that they promote is complete garbage. And it takes, you know, they've done it for so long, since the 1630s, and they've taken control of the, you know, they created the peer review system to keep dissenting opinions out. But you know, they have controlled what is quote unquote science or what is fact and truth by controlling the whole dialogue that's out there today, and by pretending that the peer review system and publishing in an academic journal is how you correct things. And I've, you know, submitted things to academic journals before and had prejudice people who were pro-psychedelic totally trash all my work and not give any valid reason based on the citations that I provided, just that, you know, they disagreed because, and then you look into their backgrounds and then you figure out that they're all part of that. We are writing a book on our Salem research, but anyway, just reading some of these comments going here.
Someone did say that they had read the Communist Manifesto and they were surprised with how utopian it is.
Right.
And you have some great thoughts on utopianism.
Yeah, well, I've done a number of shows with utopianism. I think Jacob Duhlman and I did some on that with some of the groups out there tying to Gallant and the Frankfurt, the Frankfurt Society or whatever it was. Now I'm forgetting. But okay, and then continuing on here, Frazer's classification notably diverged from earlier anthropological descriptions of cultural evolution, including that of Auguste Comte. So, you know, he's just taking it and spinning it further, essentially, because, you know, they all work for the same club. And because he claimed magic was both initially separate from religion and invariably preceded it. And then, let's see. And he also defined magic separately from belief in the supernatural and superstition. And of course, they're going to misinterpret what magic really is. And most people don't understand what magic is. You know, Aleister Crowley type Satanism with a K, using deception, using memes to control people's thoughts and what they believe and stuff. That's magic. And creating spells like the Salem witch trials spell. You have the Jewish Puritans pretending they're Christians and then pointing all of the blame on the Christians, and then the Christians take the blame for the next 326 years on something that they didn't do. So that's, magic when you understand what magic really is. And so Frazer was very anti-Christian. He was a Hermeticist and a Neoplatonist. So he rejected truth as God, essentially. And he, obviously Hermeticism is a core of the occult systems out there. And of course, that ties right back into the intelligence community. And I have not read The Invisible College. We've touched on it a little bit. And, so magic, magic is an illusion. And it's tricking people with the illusion. Oh.
Prestige.
Wow. Somebody just posted that Mark Devlin is now out promoting psychedelics. That's terrible to hear. I hope it's not true. But
Michael Pollan is now too.
Really? Yeah, that's terrible. Magic, Satanism, paganism, Freemasonry, and atheism are metaphysically the same. That is correct. Good call. They all reject the supernatural in favor of only the natural. Well, not quite. They reject logos or truth in favor of all manner of drugs and deception and everything else. But that's a whole other topic. Anyway, the study of myth and religion became his area of expertise. Except for visits to Greece and Italy, Frazer was not widely traveled. So, many people have heard the term armchair philosopher or armchair researcher. That was, one of the key people that it's levied against is Frazer. And his primary source of data were ancient histories and questionnaires mailed to missionaries and imperial officials all over the globe. And his interest in social anthropology was aroused by reading E.B. Taylor's Primitive Culture, 1871, and encouraged by his friend and biblical scholar, William Robertson Smith. And so, that's where the origins of that is. And Frazer was the first scholar to describe in detail the relations between myth and rituals. And his vision of annual sacrifice of the year king has not been borne out by field studies. Yet the Golden Bow is a study of ancient cults, rites, and myths, including the book itself is, the creation of myths and the creation of modern pagan religions and all of that. But, you have to study his work with a grain of salt. And let's see. And I already mentioned that it was initially it became like 12, 13 volumes by the time it was done, and it's very expensive to put the series together. But the Golden Bow was widely criticized for what are widely perceived as imperialist, anti-Catholic, classicist, and racist elements, including Frazer's assumption that European peasants, Aboriginal Australians, and Africans represented fossilized earlier stages of cultural evolution. So what they do is they actually invert everything. And the more I look at evolutionary theory, I think it's entirely inverted. I think we devolve, not evolve, but that's a wild theory that I talked about in one of our recent episodes. I think it was in the last episode, but that goes a bit deep for a lot of people to get their mind around, and I don't want to, I don't even have my mind around it yet. So anyway, Holly, do you have something to add?
Nope.
Nope. All right, so let's see. And someone says we do de-evolve, yes. And, when I go outside, I can see the de-evolution everywhere, and it's like, people were more educated in the past, better dressed, better, had higher thinking, everything. And, we see the IQ dramatically dropping everywhere with the agendas of the Royal Society, SRI, Tavistock, etc., and pop culture. But so now I want to get into somebody, he was a foreign fellow of the Royal Society, and he was none other than a man named Arthur Stoll. And many of you may know him as Albert Hofmann's boss or supervisor at Sandoz, and he was likely the real inventor of LSD,
What's
And
Sandoz?
Sandoz Pharmaceutical or Chemical Manufacturing Company in Basel, Switzerland. And so he was probably, again, the real inventor of LSD. And for the first time, somebody just mentioned Idiocracy. That's one of my favorite films. Thanks for mentioning that, because it really plays out today. But Picard, in his book Liquid Conspiracy, page 71, states, according to Al Hubbard, Hoffman's knowledge of LSD's effects came about several years prior to his recollection. Why the disputed chronology? Is there something to hide? If there is something to hide, it may lie in the early series of experiments conducted by Hoffman's supervisor, Dr. Stoll. These tests were often conducted without knowledge or permission of his patients. This pattern was unfortunately repeated on numerous occasions and resulted in the destruction of many lives. The conclusion of this study were published in the Swiss Pharmacological Journal. Now, I do have a copy of Arthur Stoll's 35 Years of Ergotamine. This book was originally, or is only published in German. It's only about 35 pages, and about 4 years ago, somebody very kindly translated it for me. And that's, a very fragile book to handle, so I don't want to mess it up or anything, but and very it's worth a lot too. It's very rare. But for the first time, I don't think I've ever presented this evidence. I've been sitting on it for years. So I'm going to go through and read some of our translation.
Wait, is this an exclusive here?
This is an exclusive tonight, folks. I have never presented this stuff. I didn't do it in any of the earlier shows with some former people that I was working with, and I'm very glad I didn't. But so 35.
Why is that?
Why is that? Because some people ended up not so reputable in hindsight, and unfortunately, some people are, some trolls and some disinfo, operatives, etc., are harder to figure out and require reading volumes of books before you figure out how they've duped you. So that's just how it goes, and everybody knows, right? So let's see. From 35 Years of Ergotamine, it dates from April 9th, 1918, and is titled Procedure for the Isolation of a High-Quality Compound of Sicale Cornutum. Registrations for additional patents followed the same year, and on March 27th, 1919, and let me just interject, folks, my personal theory is that LSD was invented in 1918 or 1919, and that the invention of LSD was passed over to Albert Hofmann to cover up 20 years of human experiments. And so these quotes that I'm going to read are going to help substantiate that theory. And so the procedure for the extraction of plant alkaloids was registered in the German Reich by using Swiss priorities. The new procedure was vigorously disputed by a big German alkaloid manufacturers, Merck, Boehringer, and Knoll, and of course we know Merck today. But due to the synthesis of previously unknown ergot alkaloid in the extraction of hycosamine, the naturally left-handed compound of atropine, which was previously extracted from belladonna, it was a full extent granted as a new invention. And I apologize, this is a translation. It's not perfect. The patents for the synthesis of ergotamine have expired long since, so no one can ask oneself why the competition until now, 35 years after its discovery, and that's, when Arthur Stoll published this in the 1950s, have never produced this important active pharmaceutical ingredient, bringing it in somewhat large quantities onto the market. Because until now, what was occasionally offered from other producers as ergotamine either was not ergotamine at all, or it was very impure and altered, a much less active compound. This is all the more surprising because the procedure for synthesis of ergotamine and ergotamine itself had been known for decades. Okay, so it had been known for decades in 1918. And so up to today, it is worked with this very same procedure, which was invented in the spring of 1918 and then patented. It provides us with an almost quantitative output of unaltered natural ergotamine, which, in regard to the high price of ergot at around 25 francs per kilogram, is of crucial importance. And then skipping down, the laboratory I took over on October 1st, 1917, was an empty room without fixtures or furniture and was furnished with glassware and other devices in the most elemental and necessary way. Basically, ergotamine was born a child of poor parents. The possibility of testing the newfound substance, first on animals, then on humans, initially didn't exist. In the summer of 1918, I provided the Basel University Gynecological Clinic with a diluted solution of ergotamine carbonate for experimental purposes. Okay, so he's giving it to Basel University Gynecological Clinic for experimental purposes, folks. On the occasion of birth of my son in July 1918, I had the opportunity to talk to the competent physicians about tests with the new compound, where I learned that it seemed to have a constrictive effect on the uterus of a rabbit. Okay, so it's going to go on and get a lot deeper. So skipping down, the initial or original overdose with its side effects and erroneous indications, namely the excitation of throes or labor pains before birth, had almost catastrophic consequences. I guess he's probably not talking about rabbits there, ladies and gentlemen. And so, besides the uncertainties like those in the experiment on a living organ, or on the whole animal, or even the human, at least one important factor, namely the pharmaceutical, or the pharmacon, was constant. The ergo basin was discovered at the same time, simultaneously in an English and 2 American laboratories, and over here in the ergot. And we were first who had established the correct formula, and who shortly afterwards proved the constitution of this high-active new alkaloid through partial synthesis. And then here we go, folks. The ergo basin, which we manufactured through an efficient synthesis, was identical with the natural. We need, however, an important cleavage product for this synthesis, which is inhered by all ergot alkaloids, and which is characteristic for them, the lysergic acid, whose synthesis was not successful until now. The lysergic acid, whose synthesis was not successful until now. He's talking about 1918. All right, lysergic acid dimethylamide, otherwise known as LSD. So why the hell do people pretend that Albert Hofmann and this Bicycle Day nonsense, it's total nonsense, folks. You know, it's all a cover story to cover up 2 decades of human experimentation. I've been holding on to this stuff for years to expose it. So you get the Logos Media exclusive here. And
let's throw in some super chats for that one.
Yeah, throw in some super chats for that, folks. Please, we really need support for all this. I mean, all of these books and stuff, just this little 35-page book was about $100. You know, so thank you, everyone, for your support on all of this stuff.
It's like, well, whoever has talked about that, and when you mentioned that to me, I think you mentioned something like that to me several months ago. It reminded me of World War I and mustard gas and these other chemical weapons that were being used and manufactured and tested upon people at that time. So it did make a lot of sense to me that it could have been during that era where it really started to get tested upon people. because that World War I was the age of the chemical weapons at that point. So it makes sense to me.
And, I just want to read something because Willis Harriman, who worked with Joseph Campbell and all the CIA folks over at SRI on the Changing Images of Man, I want to just quote something from him. All right. So, and he states, the story starts way back in 1935. And people, you can read this in my article, Spies in Academic Clothing, which if you haven't read it by now, you really should, because it exposes how these guys use all of this. And that was what, this article is what Holly read that tipped her off about the Salem witch trials, which brought us eventually to the Royal Society. But starts way back in 1935 with a group of followers of the German mystic Rudolf Steiner, who lived in a village in southern Germany. In 1935, a dark cloud was over Europe, so the members of this group set out to very deliberately to synthesize the chemicals, which were like the natural vegetable substances, which they were well aware had been used in all the world's major religious traditions down through the centuries. So, and I used to believe that line of rhetoric, and now I know that's false. When you get logos, you get that that's false, and they're looping back to their own research to substantiate their own theories. By 1938, they had synthesized psilocybin, LSD, and about 30 other drugs. They had stopped to think about the consequences of letting all this loose and decided against it. They decided that they were not sure what the negative effects, they're just looking out for humanity, of the drug would be, or the drugs would be, and that it just wasn't a very wise thing to do. 5 years later, in 1943, when Europe was really in bad shape, they decided apparently that possible negative consequences were nothing compared to the consequences of not doing this. So what you're going to do is you're going to dose all of the masses, all of the proletariat, for what the elites caused. If you can find any logic in that, that's the logic of the CIA and the SRI and, these mystics and all these people that we're always exposing. There is no logic. It's like, so now two members of this group, which lived in a very tight religious community, were in the Sandoz Chemical Company. That's partly how this project came to be. One of them was the chemist Dr. Albert Hofmann. He cooked up the newspaper story that everyone has heard now about the accidental ingestion of LSD and the realization of what its properties were after an amazing bicycle ride home and the visions and so on. Again, here's Willis Harriman, who worked with SRI and the CIA, tipping you off, wink, wink, that he knows the whole thing is BS. And when you read Arthur Stoll's own stuff in his own book, published in German, you can see how it's all a fraud. And then this group quietly gave supplies of the chemical to a number of doctors around the world. Again, wink, wink, like Timothy Leary in Harvard and all of them and the CIA and everybody. So, this is, and that became the foundation of MKUltra. Wow, thank you, Reese, for the $50 donation. I hear I've been buried in the notes for the last little bit. Thank you, whomever else in there, too. We've got Brian. Thank you for that, Brian. And Brian already donated 100, so amazing, Brian. Really appreciate the support. Lex Van Man, £5 donation. Thank you for that as well. So I'm going to read some more here of this. A partial synthetically produced homologous of the natural ergobasine, methyl ergobasine, has itself proven to be more interesting for the therapeutic usage. This artificially produced compound is superior to the natural product, ergobasine, both in the intensity and in the lasting of its effects, and it has itself already well introduced under its brand name, Methergin. The studies of Professor Rowlin and his staff, which since 1922 were mainly conducted with ergometrine, have shown that the natural ergot alkaloids of the ergometrine type were not only available to inhibit the facilitative or furthering, fostering, but also the inhibiting functions of the sympathetic nervous system. Also inhibiting the functions of the sympathetic nervous system. Again, so again, this is 1922, folks. They're already talking about inhibiting our nervous systems, inhibiting the sympathetic nervous system. I mean, what the heck? And then this goes into the Macy conferences and MK Ultra, the CIA, and all of that stuff. So, this is the foundation, at least as far as the last century, of the whole game plan. And so a whole new indication area based on clinical studies of Stahelin, Lofer, Porges, and Aldersberg opened itself up, namely the treatment of so-called sympathetic catatonia after Eppinger and Hess. Of the therefrom derived indications, I want to name as the most important ones of the treatment of hyperthyroidism, gastroatonia, and gastric ulcer, never mind that's caused from wheat and sugar, shingles, and above all, migraine. Professor Mayer and something Bergolzi of Zurich, who was the first who, through our suggestion, combated heavy attacks of migraine with Gynergen. Okay, so that's their earlier ergot product. And again, most of the early migraine treatments were LSD ergot type derivatives. They were almost all of them were based on ergot up until maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And then, let's see, he was also early on treating 2 migraine attacks with success. Now people just take Excedrin for migraines and bam, it's gone. So as a student of Professor Hess in Zurich, and this is skipping down, Professor Rothlin, who all along was intensively devoted to the vegetative regulation, and again, they're talking about the vegetation of our minds, had followed this question pharmacologically and worked it on himself, and had several works from 1925 to 1934 gradually established the basis for the composition of the Bellergol, which is comprised of 3 components of ergometrine, bellafolene, which I would assume is from belladonna, and phenobarbital. So, again, the barbiturates. And ergotamine inhibits the sympathetic, bellafolene, the parasympathetic hyperexcitability, and as a result of the incoming stimuli of the organ are inhibited themselves. Since the disorders of the vegetative regulation have often central causes, like a low-fat diet, for instance, folks, the phenobarbital was added, which has a depressant effect on the autonomic center of the brain. And so what I'm going to do now is, and Holly, do you want to jump in for a minute? Because I've had the floor for a while here.
I just respond to a couple of things in the chat. Someone says, what is your understanding of Novichok? And Jan and I did a video. It's called Live Research Update, BZ and the Skripal attack, which you might want to check out. It's from April. And we did a video if you want to follow up on that. And also someone mentioned around the same time that you seem to have discovered the LSD was starting to be tested on people, and also the mustard gas. Someone mentioned the Spanish flu. And yes, as we have researched more and more into plagues and pandemics and them used as a chemical warfare, it appears more and more that the Spanish flu was a massive attempt to test out chemical warfare on people. And we do have a few trolls in the chat as well, but they're just kind of chilling.
All right, I'll try. Yeah, I've been reading, so I haven't been able to pay attention to the idiots, the paid idiots.
So, and some people have been showing their hands. They've got a couple of names in that.
What are their names, so we can just block them here?
So,
anyway,
I don't like to tattle, but
all right.
people.
Well,
People
I haven't been following the chat. I've actually been reading. So if you want to tell me who they are, we can ban them. If not, let's move on.
All right. We got Real News TV. I think that you might need to put in a timeout. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't have control over that anymore. So.
All right. Let's just. Well, I'll put them on a timeout, and if Real News acts up again, they will be banned permanently. So there's your warning. All right. So Leo Perutz. Now, we need. This is a really important topic because more evidence that Albert Hofmann had nothing to do with the invention of LSD is this book right here that I, get the glare off there, that I wrote about in 2014 in my article, Manufacturing the Deadhead. And Leo Perutz, he's an interesting character, Jewish novel author. And so he publishes St. Peter's Snow, exposing a wheat fungus used to launch a communist rebellion 5 years before Hofmann invented the drug. So this book, 1933, Hofmann supposedly invented the drug in 1938. Now, some have tried to suggest, well, he inspired Hofmann. Yes, they knew that it was already in wheat. And yeah, it's a cart before the horse theory. And not only that, and as I'll go into more, LSD and psychedelics are regularly associated with communism and communist rebellions, and there's no exception here. And so, let's see. Some have suggested Perutz influenced Hofmann, but this is putting the cart before the horse. Interestingly, later Perutz's cousin, Max Perutz, would also become a member of the Royal Society. I think it was in the late 60s or 70s that Max Perutz, his cousin, became a member of the Royal Society. So, you can't go too far from these people before you start looping right back. Wow, we're actually an hour and 16 minutes already. I didn't even realize how far along we were. In a paper published in Time and Mind in 2014, English researcher Alan Piper, whom of course came out attacking me after I started exposing all of this stuff, he was in some groups who were writing slander against me, and I've had Alan Piper on the show before, so I need to call him out, and I do think that he is likely working with the Intel community, and he was working with Professor Karl Ruck, who is episode number 1 on this show, or on the Gnostic Media podcast back in 2008. I do now think that they were all working in cahoots together, and they were also working in an invisible college together that Professor Karl Ruck ran. So, yes, I am calling these people out, as I have always done. I have no qualms about it. That's my personal opinion about Alan Piper, but he was working with those groups to write hit pieces on me with known CIA agents like Mark Stallman, who wrote hit pieces on me, with Iona Miller, whose own husband admitted that she was a CIA spin writer, which I've already done a video, which is in my channel, which those of you can check out, of her own ex-husband admitting that she was a CIA spin writer. So, Alan Piper was working directly with them. Let's see. Piper has noted that in 1933, Jewish author Leo Perutz wrote the novel St. Peter's Snow, wherein a new drug made from fungus from wheat was secretly tested and used in a failed attempt to bring about a return of religious beliefs and a return of a Roman emperor to his throne. With a priest who warns that instead the worship of it's instead the worship of Moloch. True. Rather than a return of Christian belief, the book ends in a communist rebellion. The relationship between psychedelics and communism or socialist political leanings is not uncommon and should be noted. Piper sees the parallelism between Perutz's psychedelic drug and LSD as an unsolved mystery. Golly, I just can't figure it out. But provides cultural historical background to the conception of the novel and the scientific study of ergot. In my opinion, Perutz's book clearly shows an awareness of that agenda. And this is actually, I think, Piper sent this to me when we were writing that article. It's ironic, too, that Perutz chooses the name of St. Peter's Snow for the title of his book from the following quote, as it states on page 93, that, quote, in the Alps, it was called St. Peter's Snow. And, of course, the Alps are primarily in Switzerland, where Albert Hofmann supposedly invented the drug. And skipping down just a few segments from the book itself, and boy, we are cruising along here. So a few months later, I came across the incomparably more important testimony of Dionysius the Areopagite of the 4th century Christian Neoplatonist. There's the Neoplatonists again. Never mind, folks. Move along. Who states in one of his works that he imposed a 2-day fast on members of his community. Okay, who longed for the real presence of God, and then he regaled them with bread made with holy flour. Okay, so ergot contaminated bread, anyone? Wink, wink. And I came across an ancient Roman rural priest song, a solemn invocation of Marmar or Mavor, who at the time was not yet the bloodthirsty god of war, but the peaceful protector of the fields. Let your white frost invade the crop so that they acknowledge thy power, it said. Like all priests, Roman rural priests knew the secret of the hallucinogenic drug. Like all Roman priests. Okay, so it wasn't about logos, it was about doing drugs. That's what they want us to believe, folks. Just keep that in mind here. And the hallucinogenic drug that produces a state of ecstasy in which people become seeing and acknowledging of the power of God. Okay, so they invert logos into the power of the drugs, which is what I fell into in my early work, which I've exposed for a long time. I bought all of their crap, but here Perutz lays out how they did the theory back in 1933. So the white frost was not a kind of wheat, but a wheat disease, a parasite, a fungus that invaded the wheat and fed on its substance. Again, this is 5 years before Hoffman supposedly invented the drug. There are many kinds of parasitic fungi, the Baron went on. The Eskimo shoot, I can't even say that. Mycetes, Phycomycetes, and forget that. And in a synopsis, Fungorium, Bargan describes more than 100 varieties, and nowadays his work is regarded as out of date. But and this is a novel, folks, but among the 100 I had identified, the only one that produces ecstatic effects when it is introduced into human food and thus finds its way into the human organism, there is or was a wheat disease that was often described in earlier centuries and was known by a different name wherever it appeared. In Spain, it was called Mary Magdalene's Plate. In Alsace, it was known as Poor Soul's Dew. In Adam of Cremonia's physician's book, it was called Misericord Seed, and in the Alps, it was called St. Peter's Snow. And then again, the book continues later on with the same theme we're discussing here. Two of the main characters of the plot argue over whether they should test the drug on themselves, and then later on we discover in the story that the woman Bibiche, who created and tried the drug, is the one who headed the communist rebellion. You want to jump in there?
How does this connect to Pont Saint-Esprit, you think?
Well, okay, well, that's a really good question. You know what, folks? I've been totally forgetting to show the database the whole show. Oh, darn it. So there's Comte. Let's just go through these. There's Karl Marx, everyone. Here, woo! There's Karl Marx and all the stuff, the Frankfurt School, Erich Fromm that he influenced, and all these people, top evil villains. Here's
the top evil villains are in red, everyone, if you can actually read it.
And if you click on the top evil villains up there in the website version, it'll take you to all of the top evil villains. By the way, I'll just do that right there so people can see they're all in red. But so we can see the Royal Society and all tied in there. And here's the Royal Society. Cotton Mather, of course, whom we've been exposing. Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Royal Society. Basically, if the Royal Society's touched it, it's a pile of you know what. So
it's like San Francisco.
Yeah, it's like San Francisco. there's shit everywhere, you know. So here's Arthur Stoll, Royal Society, works for Sandoz. Now, I haven't figured out the direct relation between Arthur Stoll and Perutz, whether it was a cousin of Perutz's, but somebody had an inside tip of what was going on at the Royal Society and tipped Perutz off. And, here's Leo Perutz, his cousin Max Perutz. In fact, about 4 years ago, I contacted Max Perutz's a family member of his Robin, son of his, Robin Perutz. And as soon as I asked him what was really going on in the connection, the conversation stopped cold. Dun, dun, dun. So let's see, skipping over here, Sir James George Frazer. Sorry, folks, there's that one. And, skipping ahead there. So what was the question? Sorry, now I forgot. Holly?
Oh, what's the connection between all this and Pont Saint-Esprit?
Okay, so sorry, that was Arthur Stoll and Pont Saint-Esprit. So let me go back here. So Arthur Stoll was apparently, geez, what did I just do with it? All right, hold on a second. Arthur Stoll was apparently at Pont Saint-Esprit along with Albert Hofmann. Albert Hofmann wrote a thing saying that it wasn't ergot, it wasn't mercury, and that was all disinformation. And as we found out, mercury ore or cinnabar is very possible in some of these, but what I think the most likely candidate for Pont Saint-Esprit is I think it was ergotamine or ergometrine, but I suspect it was ergotamine was what they used at Pont Saint-Esprit. And when you look it up, it has the exact same symptoms as St. Anthony's fire, which I have over here on the left of this or right of this. But possible side effects include nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, diarrhea, headaches, dizziness, tetanitis, chest pain, palpitations, brachycardia, transient hypertension, and other cardiac arrhythmias, dyspnea, rashes, and shock. An overdose produces the characteristic poisoning of ergotism or St. Anthony's fire. Prolonged vasospasm resulting in gangrene and amputations, hallucinations and dementia and abortions. Gastrointestinal disturbances such as diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting are common. And so that matches pretty well with exactly what was happening at Pont Saint-Esprit. And Albert Hofmann and Arthur Stoll were both there hiding out in the region, observing the whole thing as it was going down. So, they were a part of it. Albert Hofmann was accused by, what's his name? Now I'm forgetting off the top of my head. He wrote the book A Terrible Mistake, and he also came out against my research when I started exposing all the MKUltra stuff. But Hank Albarelli claims that Albert Hofmann was also French intel, and it's very highly likely that he was on contract with the CIA on his many trips with CIA agent and top operative Gordon Wasson, whom I exposed as MKUltra Subproject 58. So all of those guys tie in together. Do we have time, Holly, to get into one of the world's biggest frauds by the name of Albert Einstein, or are we going to have to save that for the next episode?
So maybe if we get another super chat, that might be a good reason.
Yeah, that would be a good reason.
I think one thing I just do want to mention is that some people act like people were just using like ergot as like a religious or recreational drug. And after you actually mention and discuss what the side effects are, like getting gangrene, like your limbs falling off and
or
like
amputated, right?
Yeah, and just the crazy things that people go through. I mean, the more I research how, and even dosage could be so difficult. I mean, you're risking your life when you take that sort of stuff. So I just, the more I think about it, the more I find it hard to believe that these ancient societies would engage in that sort of behavior, like recreationally or religiously, just because it is so dangerous. And if you think about adults who are supposed to be running the society and producing food and keeping the house running and stuff, if you think about them doing these types of drugs, like how would society not fall apart? I mean, if people were getting sick and possibly dying from these types of drug use on supposedly, you know, a semi-regular basis. I mean, it just sounds very risky if you think about it from a practical perspective.
And Reese says the Jesuits did it as one of the most prolific examples of misdirection. That's John Phelps's disinformation. And it's partial disinformation. We have come across a number of Jesuits that are involved in that. Bahari, if that's being pronounced correctly, says the normalization of drugs and pedophilia begins through all outlets. Jan is 100% correct with the de-evolution theory, all Kabbalistic inversions. And of course, we've exposed Kabbalistic inversion. So no super chat yet. Anybody want a super chat, or should we save this for next episode? We're an hour and a half in. We appreciate if somebody wants to make a kind donation. It's really appreciated.
Someone says we should rip Einstein a new one. We're also going to do that with Richard Dawkins, the cannibal, next time.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins, the cannibal, exactly. So let me see. And, for part 4, we also have Bob Dylan. He's a member of the Royal Society. Robert Zimmerman. We should call him by his real name since they all fake their names and stuff when they're involved in this crud. Rupert Sheldrake, Terence McKenna's pal and all this. Yes, he's another one. Elon Musk, of course, was just recently added as a fellow to the Royal Society. So, I don't see any super chats yet, folks. So thank you.
That's all right.
So thank you, everybody, so much. And we will be doing a part 4 in the next week or two on... Oh, there's $10. Oh, all right. So
we're so cheap.
We're bought off for $10. Thanks. Thank you, Rugi. We really appreciate it. Just giving you a hard time there. So let's see the Macy connection with Einstein assistant. Let's see Einstein, Huxley. How do you pronounce that, Holly? Holly. Yeah, she speaks and reads French, not me. So, yes, Macy connection with Einstein assistant. Well, what's interesting is Einstein was close buddies with, goodness, whose name do we always end up mentioning in every show?
Huxley.
He was good friends with Julian Huxley, and they worked together at at Princeton. And so you never go very far, when you get into exposing these groups. But, all roads lead to Huxley when you're investigating these kind of psyops and stuff. So where did we find, goodness, I can close some of these tabs now. Oh, let's see. He was over here. Albert Einstein. He's probably the biggest fraud of the frauds. He wasn't a key guy involved in MK Ultra, but he was key behind faking and plagiarizing and stealing tons of research. One of the best books out there exposing Einstein is a book by Christopher John Bjerknes, The Manufacture and Sale of Saint Einstein, and he's actually written 2 books exposing Einstein's corruption, and he also wrote the book Albert Einstein, the Incorrigible Plagiarist, and I highly recommend checking out Christopher John Bjerknes' work, and you can also download his book on Einstein. It should be up here in the top tabs in the database or in the connections in there. You should be able to get to it and download it on PDF or whatever. It's 2,825 page treatise on Einstein's plagiarism, Zionism, the history of Zionism, racism, Judaism, and more. The complete book of the manufacture and sale of Saint Einstein. And his website, I believe, was removed off of the internet. Thank you, Brandon Warren, so much for the $5 support there. We really appreciate that. And so I really check out both of his books. And the table of contents is quite extensive. Einstein discovers his racist calling, manufacture and sale of St. Einstein, promoting the cult of Einstein. And we see this all over all over Princeton, New Jersey as well. I've been out to Princeton a number of times, and there's just, the people worship this guy. And, the theory of relativity has been disproved many times. Most of his work has been disproved, or he stole it from others. He influenced parts of quantum physics, and I have all the people who created quantum physics up above here, but he really just influenced it there. And, it looks like, did I miss something else there? No, okay, we got them all. So Werner Heisenberg, Max Born, Paul Dirac, Immanuel Kant, all these guys, John von Neumann, they all influenced quantum physics. And of course, I've been public for years, and I'm starting to get some support for this from others, that quantum physics is a total fraud. People laugh hysterically at me for mentioning it, but if you study the trivium and quadrivium all the way through, and study the follow-up study material by, oh goodness, I had him on the show early on.
Thank you, Bahara.
Yeah, thank you for the $5 donation. Don't worry. Oh, you pronounce it great. Appreciate ya. Would do more if I could. Thank you so much for your support. It's really appreciated. Oh goodness. Now, quantum computing, quantum physics. Geez, David Harriman, sorry. And David Harriman is here. David Harriman, I had a 2-part episode with him back in 2011, exposing the quantum physics fraud. And of course, the people who have attacked that I claim it's a fraud, or it's highly, they say it's not a fraud. He doesn't claim it's a fraud. It's a lot of misdirection. Maybe he doesn't point it out, but if you use the trivium, if you use the critical thinking and logic that David Harriman provides, you can pretty much realize that all of this stuff was a fraud. So, anyway, it's at least in my opinion, it's a fraud, and in many others, it's a fraud, and it's part of Kabbalistic magic, etc. But so back to Albert Einstein. He was brought into the Royal Society in 1921. And let's see. Basically, what Einstein did was he hung out at the U.S. Patent Office and ripped off other people's work and changed their work and then made it his own and pretended that he was smart. And, he and Julian Huxley would take many walks around Princeton together and work on their schemes together. Albert Hoffman won the Nobel Prize, which of course doesn't mean much. Carrie Mullis is there, whom I have met a number of times. Here's Max Perutz again. We just discussed Max Perutz a few minutes ago. Max Born we just discussed. Werner Heisenberg we just discussed. All these people were given the Nobel Prize and Francis Crick is another interesting one. He may be Royal Society too. I think I just discovered yesterday or day before that he was Royal Society as well. So, they're constantly spinning us off into this stuff. He was a member of the First Humanist Society of New York, along with Julian Huxley and John Dewey. And we're going to cover Julian Huxley much more in the next episode, but you can go into the brain database and see just a few of Huxley's connections into eugenics and mind control and humanism. Of course, Julian Huxley invented the term transhumanist, and he was a major proponent of the Planned Parenthood agenda, etc. He was a key founder behind UNESCO. He was a president. That's why he's up here above the Royal Society. He was a president of the Royal Society, and he continued Darwin's work, the new synthesis, the new synthesis, the new synthesis. They're always having to rebrand it because, it's, they have to stretch it thin on a lot of this stuff. Why don't you jump in on
Okay, good. So Rugi said he wanted the connection with Huxley, Einstein, and Lemaitre. And I just wanted to mention that George Lemaitre was a pioneer in applying Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity to cosmology. So he kind of took Einstein's work and ran with it. And he was guess what? He was a member of the Royal Astronomical Society, which is a part, a branch of the Societas. And he was, friends with all these people. He was a Jesuit. He was the first to derive what is known as Hubble's law, Hubble's constant. And he is also, guess what, Jan, you're going to like this. He also proposed what became known as the Big Bang theory of the origin of the universe, which is the primeval atom or the cosmic egg. So yes, a Jesuit from the University of Cambridge, all connected in with the Royal Society, and yes, MIT as well. That might be something interesting to talk about MIT at some point. But thank you, Rugi, for the question there. That's excellent.
Let's see if MIT pops up here. Yeah, of course, that's in Massachusetts also. Aldous Huxley was at MIT. But there you go. I don't know if I can't even pronounce his name in French, so I'm not going to massacre it. But, thank you, Bill, for the $20 from Bill in San Francisco. And sorry, Bill, about all the poo in the streets up there. They've really let the communists take over up there, so there's going to be a little bit of poo in the streets, and hopefully we can get these people out and start cleaning things up in this state. So,
well, they got poop maps now, so there's avoid the poop. So
yeah, there's poop maps now, so you can go around the poop, step over it, drive around it, etc. So good on you. Thanks for the support on that. Why don't you go into some more of those connections? Did you have more on that?
No, that's basically. I just wanted to touch on Lemaitre and Hubble and Einstein and the Big Bang. Do you have the Big Bang in your database?
Probably the Big Bang and the black hole. Another dark joke.
Exactly.
Oh, it is in there. Here we go. Oh, there he is. Georges Lemaitre, singularity types, pre-Big Bang, and technological singularity is right there too. Oh, shocker. So that's brings us right up to what's his name in the desert, the radio host who died not long ago. George Norrie took over his show. But anyway, so that's the technological singularity, the omega point theory, the Terence McKenna time wave zero theory. That's all based off of the same stuff and off of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, University of Cambridge. There we go. We have an interesting photograph of the guy. Society of Jesuits. So there we go. Grant me one miracle, the Big Bang, and you get the Big Bang and the black hole. And, and then you have a whole new, still unproven, and it says right here, Big Bang theory. It's not proved science. It's a theory. So, people act like this stuff is proved. A scientific theory is an explanation or aspect of the natural world that can be repeatedly tested, at least with the fraud science that they've put forward.
So just to wrap this up a little bit, I guess what we've noticed is that the Royal Society does promote a lot of theories, through their creation of peer review, through scientism, the Enlightenment. It's endlessly fascinating and somewhat admirable, I suppose, in a strange and twisted way that they've been able to basically control the narrative of science, political, economic thought. Like, I didn't really think that they were that involved with economics until we found out Adam Smith and Karl Marx were both members of the same society.
So controlling the whole dialectic, and yes, everyone who said Art Bell, yes, that's who I was trying to think of, and thank you for all 6 or so of you who remembered his name before I did. So I think that's a wrap for tonight. I think next week we'll start off with the infamous Julian Huxley and bring everything forward to the present, and hopefully, well, at least in the next week or two, and hopefully provide you all an excellent show. And it's been a really enlightening experience for us as well, going through all of this and figuring out who all of these people were, the background. We're not so much right now going through the theories, but we're going through the background and the connection between these people, the dialectics that they've created, the peer review system to control the official narrative, placing scholars like Thomas Huxley did with the X Club to promote Darwin's theories, and placing them in certain universities to control the official scientific narrative, to get everybody to think that their lies are truth, and to keep us away from logos and from thinking and from looking at these things on a deeper level.
Do you have a plan for your next show on the 7th?
Not yet. It's not definitively placed yet. Do you want to do that on the 7th?
I will be busy that night. I got work.
All right. Well, next time, don't ask me on the air. All right. Okay. So anyway, folks, that's a wrap for tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We had quite a few viewers tonight. Thanks for all the support and donations tonight as well. We really appreciate everybody. And so that's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. Have a lovely evening.
Good night.